everybody, so Nintendo's E3 presentation is now behind us, and I thought it was a pretty solid presentation. Admittedly, not the most hype Nintendo E3 Direct ever, but still a good one, with some very great game reveals. Some of the highlights for me included the new WarioWare game, which I think the Switch is perfect for. A Mario Party built on Nintendo 64 nostalgia, which I'm a huge fan of, Advance Wars getting anything new, which absolutely shocked me, and finally seeing the rumored 2D Metroid game, Metroid 5, or Metroid Dread, and it looks awesome. And of course, our Smash reveal, surprisingly being Kazuya from Tekken, seems everyone had counted Tekken out after the Heihachi Mii costume. So this feels like the first time we may have actually been purposely misdirected or misled to hide a Smash reveal character. Regardless of no one guessing at it, Bandai Namco has deserved a second rep for a long time, and Tekken was the obvious series choice to fill that spot. Even if, again, a certain Mii costume happening made us think Tekken was off the table. I'm a big fan of the Tekken series, so I'm very happy to see it get into Smash. Kazuya, admittedly, probably wouldn't be my first choice for a Tekken rep. I probably would have went with Heihachi, I just think he's more recognizable. But having the devil aspect to the character will probably make for a pretty cool fighter. And above both of those characters, I think Yoshimitsu would have been the perfect Tekken Soul Calibur double rep. But that was probably never going to happen. I will of course make an after Kazuya Smash leak rumor, theory, etc. speculation roundup video, as there's a lot to go over and talk about. As always there is after a new Smash Fighter reveal, including the whole Vergaben Master Chief thing that happened in the hours leading up to Nintendo's E3 and our latest Smash reveal. So give me a few days to compile stuff and make that video. Hopefully I'll have it done by the end of the week or this weekend, that's my estimate. But that isn't the video I want to do today. What I want to talk about today is the Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild 2 trailer we got. Probably the only disappointing thing about Nintendo's E3 Direct for me was that I was very hopeful we'd see a lot of Breath of the Wild 2. It's been 2 whole years since they revealed that game was in the works, and we've seen absolutely nothing about the game ever since. I expected we'd get a full reveal with potentially lots and lots of gameplay, maybe even at the Nintendo Treehouse event. I expected to get an exact release date for the game, and while I was accepting that the game might be a 2022 release, I still thought we'd get a more specific date than just sometime next year, which has me a tad worried, as that could mean much later than like spring 2022, as I feel like if it was spring, they would have just said that was the case. And finally, I thought we'd get the title of the game, but we didn't, so we have to continue referring to the game as Breath of the Wild 2, and I'll talk a bit more about the title a little later. We did get some gameplay footage revealed to us, and while it looks awesome, it was also a very short trailer for the game. And after 2 years of waiting to see something more from this game, this less than 2 minute long trailer has done very little to satisfy my intrigue about this particular game. If anything, I just have more questions now than I did before. So today I figured it would be fun to do a deep dive into Breath of the Wild 2 speculation and see what we might have learned from this tiny bit of more info we got from the Nintendo E3 Direct. Now, before we get into the hypothetical, really speculative stuff, I figured we should just watch the trailer again, basically just do a trailer analysis at the start here. So it starts off with the evil-looking Malice energy overtaking Link's right arm. It looks like Link is holding the Master Sword, and the Malice might take it from him or even destroy it. We don't see it ever again in this trailer. And that includes in any of the preceding gameplay footage, so yeah, it doesn't look like Link has the Master Sword, at least not at the start of this game. This evil Malice energy seems to be in conflict with the glowing green energy, and that's sort of what we saw in the first trailer. We get a flash of our Mumra-looking Ganondorf, or assumed to be Ganondorf character. There seems to be holes in his chest and hands, and he has a sort of half-tunic, toga-looking robe on. And he now seems to be standing up and raising his arms up, and he seems free from the energy arm that was holding him in place that we saw in the first trailer. Potentially, he's calling up all that Malice energy or something. We then see Zelda fall into a dark abyss, this big chasm that's opened up and Zelda falls into it. We sort of got glimpses of this in the first trailer, but here we can see Zelda has actually fallen down and it appears to be very far. So those shots of Link and Zelda reaching for each other in the first trailer, it now means Link probably did not catch her or wasn't able to hold on to her or something. She has fallen. We can see that Zelda has something on her belt, and I was curious if this might be the Sheikah Slate, but looking back at the first trailer, there is a pouch on Zelda's hip that could contain the Sheikah Slate, but I haven't spotted the Sheikah Slate itself on either Link or Zelda throughout any of these trailers. And it does seem odd they wouldn't travel with it, so I assume it's gotta be somewhere. We then cut to what appears to be actual gameplay footage for the first time, and it's of what appears to be Link falling from very, very high up in the sky towards a floating island. His hair looks a bit longer, or at least not tied back, so it's a little different than usual. And we can see his arm is covered in something that looks almost mechanical, and odd, dark-looking designs kind of tattoo his arm and also somewhat present across the entire right side of his body. Maybe some of that malice energy has actually attached itself to him. And Link has a new outfit in this shot, if this even is Link. It appears to be a half-tunic toga-looking thing, similar to what the mummy Ganon was wearing, actually. And this allows for this mysterious arm part of his body to be fully visible. Once again, there's no Sheikah Slate anywhere to be seen on Link, and it does appear that Link does not have the Master Sword either in this shot. It cuts to night in the sky with Link using the paraglider, and he now has arrows and a shield with a sort of eye symbol, similar to the Sheikah symbol on his shield. And there's some triangles reminiscent of the Triforce on the shield as well. His pants and boots look a little different than they did in that first shot of him falling, so I imagine these are different outfits. The paraglider now has ribbons attached to it. Having the ribbons might mean the direction of the wind could factor into how you're traversing the sky, and these ribbons might help determine the direction of the wind. We can see more islands off in the distance and a strange structure off to the right. Next we see Link running on an island towards like an archway. Looks like there's ruins everywhere, and more floating islands can be seen above. We then get a look at this cool looking stone monster mech thing. It has some symbol on its chest. It appears to be held together or powered up by the same green energy we saw in the underground cutscene, and the mysterious glowing arm that Link might now be wielding, actually. We can see the type of ruins we've seen on the other island shots in this trailer, so the giant stone potential boss monster thing we're seeing here is likely on the floating islands as well. This next shot is pretty interesting, as it seems to be back on the ground of Hyrule and not on the floating islands. In fact, no floating islands are in sight here. Link has his traditional Breath of the Wild outfit as well, though again, no Master Sword or Sheikah Slate that I can see. The Bokoblin Lookout is built on top of a stone talus, and the Bokoblins have rather long horns, unlike they did in the first Breath of the Wild. We now see that green energy overtaking Link's arm, and it does look like some kind of mechanical stuff is wrapped around his arm as well. I'm guessing, like everyone else seems to be, that this is a Sheikah gauntlet or something, and is essentially going to be the new Sheikah Slate for this game. Link also looks like he's shirtless and laying down in this scene, so maybe this green energy is saving him from the malice that was trying to take his arm. Next, we see this spike ball coming down a hill. Link is in his classic Breath of the Wild outfit, and he can use this arm to do something similar to what the Sheikah Slate does in the first game. He uses it to stop the spike ball, which is sort of similar to stasis, and throw it back at the Bokoblins and the Moblin. But I think this might actually be a reverse time rune ability or something that we're seeing. It looks like it's going back through its past history. Basically, the spike ball going backwards through its timeline, rolling upwards instead of down the slope. Next, we see Link in some sort of cave, fighting some bizarre worm-looking monster. There appears to be a little step platform thing beyond the monster, so probably like a chest will appear if you defeat it or something. Again, traditional Breath of the Wild outfit, no Master Sword or Sheikah Slate. And he uses some kind of dragon head shield weapon to shoot flames at the monster. This doesn't appear to be an arm rune ability or something like that, like the spike ball reverse time thing probably was, but rather just a weapon, as Link is using it with his left arm and not his right. We then get this really interesting moment where we see a puddle of water turn into a droplet and shoot upwards towards the sky. Link, surrounded by green energy, also shoots upwards. Almost as if he's diving up from water, he actually phases through the floating island and leaves like a ripple where he emerges. This is also Link with the long hair and the half tunic, so every time we see the floating island parts of this trailer, it seems to be Link looking like that. I assume once again this is a reverse time thing, somehow using a puddle of water to go back through its timeline to when it was a rain droplet and going up into the sky rather than the rain falling down to the earth. This might actually be the key component for exploring these floating islands, finding puddles of water, reversing the rain droplet's timeline to get Link up into the sky, and then phasing through the islands themselves. Potentially phasing through stone using water could also be what's going on here. There are some stairs leading up to some ruins over on the right, and many other floating islands, and a world below can be seen as this shot expands outwards. Looking below, we can see what appears to be the Ceres Scablands, directly below this shot, and that's the first time a recognizable area from the first Breath of the Wild can be seen in these island shots that I can identify anyway. Over on Twitter, Masked Nintendo Bandit wrote, "The image from the new Breath of the Wild 2 trailer shows us the southeastern portion of the Hyrule Ridge, on the surface of Hyrule. I noticed that the Zonai pillars are missing from the rightmost hill in the picture. We may be looking at an ancient Hyrule. The Zonai were an ancient race that built structures across Hyrule. In the first Breath of the Wild, we can see many of these structures as ruins. So for these pillars to be missing, what we might be seeing in this trailer could be a point in time far back in Hyrule's distant past, when the Zonai had yet to build them. Could all of these floating island sky sequences actually be taking place in the past? I'll talk a bit more later about some theories suggesting this game might involve time travel, and perhaps the sky sections are in fact existing in the past. A little later in this trailer, we see this same section of Hyrule when Hyrule Castle is lifted up, yet we see no floating islands. Though clearly they should be there, unless they either get raised up at a point after Hyrule Castle rises up, or if the floating islands only exist in a different point in time, or an alternate dimension or something. Or the floating islands are somehow hidden from below maybe, I don't know. That was sort of a thing in Skyward Sword. There's also some kind of egg-looking thing on the small pillar on the island, and it looks a lot like the shoulder of the mechanical thing we saw earlier. The music starts to get really ominous and distorted, and we see what looks like Hyrule Castle rising up into the sky with all this dark energy below it. There are no other floating islands visible here though, but maybe this is a similar event to the raising of the Sheikah Towers, and more islands floating up during this could happen, or maybe that happens a little later at some other event. But as of this shot with Hyrule Castle rising up with the Malice below it, that's the only floating island we can see. Finally, we get this 2022 release date, and the trailer is over. No title for the game, which really bums me out because I'm sick of referring to this game as Breath of the Wild 2 or the sequel to Breath of the Wild. Although, honestly, maybe Nintendo wants us to call it Breath of the Wild 2 for as long as possible, so that the casual crowd hears about this game. Breath of the Wild did phenomenally well even by Zelda game standards, so while a new Zelda game should stand on its own just fine, I think Nintendo would want the more casual crowd, who doesn't tune in for every Zelda title each time, to know that this game is in fact a sequel to Breath of the Wild specifically, as again, that game in particular got tons of praise and had a lot of people play it who don't always play Zelda games. Anyway, that's all we get from this trailer. While exciting, it feels like it isn't revealing too much more than we already knew, besides adding floating islands as being potentially a big part of this game. Though arguably we saw Hyrule Castle rise up in the first trailer, so we knew about at least one floating island. We get to see some specific abilities from Link's new Sheikah gauntlet arm thing or whatever, but we've kind of all been speculating the arm would be a major part of this game, likely replacing the Sheikah Slate anyway, especially since we saw that in concept art for Breath of the Wild, that this arm idea has been around for a while. On that note about not yet finding out the title of this game, there might actually be more to that than simply being a marketing ploy to hammer home to casual fans that this is in fact a direct sequel to Breath of the Wild. IGN wrote, Nintendo says there's a reason it's keeping Breath of the Wild 2's name a secret. It's going to be meaningful. As for why we're holding back on the name, you'll just have to stay tuned because, obviously, Zelda names are kind of important. Trinan says during our interview. Those subtitles, they start to give little bits of hints about maybe what's going to happen. Breath of the Wild 2 is going to be shorthand, and it's natural for people to want to find a shorthand way to frame it. We're still calling it the sequel to Breath of the Wild, says Trinan. Okay, so we learned the title of the game might actually be kept secret from us because it reveals something about the game itself that they aren't ready to tell us yet. So with that in mind, let's get speculating. I'm just going to wildly talk about a bunch of possible speculation that won't necessarily fit together. Some ideas might contradict other ideas. I just want to suggest a bunch of possibilities for what could be going on with this game and lots of cool theories I've heard. Past Zelda games have had titles that do reveal aspects of the game. For instance, Ocarina of Time reveals both the ocarina and the time travel elements of that game. Actually, some people are speculating time travel might play a part in this game, and given the potential time reversal mechanic we've seen with the Sheikah gauntlet or whatever, maybe that is true. The Legend of Zelda Hand of Time or something could be the title. I've also heard a lot of people suggest Death of the Wild, though I think they only suggest that because it rhymes. I haven't really seen much in this game that suggests it's going to be death-themed. Or maybe the title reveals some character. Majora's Mask and Twilight Princess refer to key players in those games, so maybe there's a character they're not ready to show us yet, and the title refers to them. For instance, if the subtitle to this game actually did say, like, Majora or Zant, it would reveal the return of that character. If it had Twilight in it, it could reveal a connection to that realm. I'm doubtful of those, but any direct reference to any past Zelda games or past Zelda characters could reveal more than they want to at this point. Perhaps somehow the title refers to this Mummy Ganondorf character and would reveal something about them that they want to keep secret for a bit longer. There does appear to be a link between the outfit this Ganondorf is wearing and the outfit Link is wearing in most of these sky scenes. Actually, there was already speculation about the legendary hero from the mural looking an awful lot like Ganondorf and not very much like Link. There's long red hair, what appears to be a large nose, and now that I have a closer look, he even has this green half-tunic cape thing on. Of course, now we see Link, or what appears to be Link, wearing this outfit with longer-looking hair. At least it isn't tied back anymore anyway, it looks longer, in all the floating island moments. Link on the ground is always shown in the classic Breath of the Wild outfit, but still uses the new arm mechanics. So these on-the-ground Hyrule moments do appear to happen after whenever Link gets this new arm thing. I've heard a lot of suggestions for what could be going on here between the on-the-ground moments we saw and the in-the-sky floating island moments we saw. This might be two different Links we're seeing. Maybe there's some time travel element, and this long-haired, half-tunic Link is in the past, like 10,000 years ago from that ancient legend mural when Calamity Ganon was first stopped. Maybe that world, that timeline, 10,000 years ago, has floating islands, and then our present-day Link is in Hyrule with no floating islands, and you switch between the two time periods. Maybe even this long-haired Link is actually the mummified Ganon character, and maybe he was actually the ancient hero. Maybe this isn't Ganon at all. I don't know, just throwing out a bunch of ideas here. Also worth noting, there does appear to be one of those divine beast-looking symbols on the green tunic, much like the champions had on their blue outfits. Of course, Link being seen in two different outfits is not confirmation that there's two different Links or some crazy time travel stuff happening. Link changes outfits all the time in Breath of the Wild, so maybe the floating island part simply are later on in the game when that outfit is relevant or something. And in the first Breath of the Wild game, Link does have outfits that greatly change his hair, and even one that makes his hair length much longer than normal. So having loose, long hair in this tunic doesn't confirm it's some different Link or a different part of the timeline or something. It is pretty interesting there's no floating islands visible during any of the on-the-ground Link moments that we saw, suggesting that either they show up later on, or they're in some different universe or different time period or something. I was thinking maybe the on-the-ground classic Breath of the Wild outfit Link moments we saw could be from some tutorial beginning part of the game, like the Great Plateau was in Breath of the Wild. You're on the Great Plateau at the beginning and have to earn the paraglider and raise up the Sheikah Towers before you can leave. We see what appears to be this one event where Link and Zelda awaken the mummified Ganon, Zelda falls in the pit, and Link's arm gets possessed by something, whatever that thing is, and Hyrule Castle raises up from the malice. We're led to believe this all kinda happens at once. Maybe directly following that event, with only Hyrule Castle floating, we get a tutorial section where Link now has no Master Sword, and he also doesn't have the Sheikah Slate anymore, but does have the new arm mechanic. He's in the classic Breath of the Wild outfit still, and has to do some tutorials similar to the Great Plateau that will cause the rest of the floating islands to appear. Maybe he'll even get this half-tunic outfit. Maybe the outfit is similar to like getting the paraglider, where you receive it after the tutorial area, and it helps open up exploring the rest of the game. Exploring the floating islands in this case. We do always see Link wearing that outfit when he's shown in the sky. Again, if that even is Link, maybe it's the past hero from 10,000 years ago, who could even be the mummified Ganondorf. I don't know, they're wearing similar outfits, but maybe that's just because the ancient hero and Ganondorf are from that past timeline. Maybe Link just gets that outfit from back then, or maybe it really is taking place in the past. I was assuming this arm mechanic would be some sort of ancient Sheikah tech thing, but maybe this all has to do with the ancient Zonai race that built all the labyrinths and some of the cool ruins in the first Breath of the Wild. We learned very little about them, and if there is some time travel to ancient times, maybe they factor into all this stuff. They seem to worship the dragons, and the dragons do fly up into the sky, and we have floating islands. So yeah, the Zonai could factor into all this. IGN tweeted out, Nintendo says the sequel to The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild does have a title, but they aren't announcing it yet because it could clue players into what happens in the game. What do you think the title is? And I wrote my suggestion for what I think the title could be. I said it might be The Legend of Zelda, As Above, So Below. Because I think the part that they might still be hiding from us is what could be going on with Zelda, and I think the game's title could tie into that. As above, so below is a real-life phrase from ancient times. It usually comes up in like astrology and New Age stuff, but basically means what happens in the celestial world affects the terrestrial world on the ground. So stuff in the sky affects the ground. So this concept comes up in stuff like horoscopes, being based off of the movement of the planets and the stars. But sometimes the phrase simply means the heavenly deities above or whatever are influencing our mortal lives below on Earth. I don't know if a Zelda game would take a real-life phrase as its subtitle, but there's some poetic qualities there. And my guess is we've only been shown half of what the new areas to explore in this game actually are. I think what is likely going to be happening in this game is that Zelda has fallen into the Earth. Link is back above ground on Hyrule, and there are now floating islands. Link can explore Hyrule and the floating islands with his new arm mechanic. Meanwhile, I think Zelda will be underground. I think she'll have the Sheikah Slate and use the old rune abilities from the first Breath of the Wild, and she might even have the Master Sword as her weapon if it didn't get destroyed. We don't see the Sheikah Slate or the Master Sword with Link, so I think either they got destroyed or Zelda fell into that chasm, and so did the Sheikah Slate and Master Sword. Zelda might recover them when she wakes up wherever she's fallen to. Likely some further part of the ancient dungeon labyrinth system that they were exploring. It appears they went deep under Hyrule Castle and obviously found like Ganon down there, so I think there's probably a lot more going on underground. Probably all that malice rising up from below Hyrule Castle is preventing Link from just going down again and rescuing Zelda. Whether or not the Master Sword is down there with Zelda, we did see the malice taking over Link's arm and sort of corrupting the Master Sword too, so maybe he's just unable to use it after his arm has some malice corruption, or maybe it got destroyed, or maybe it fell down with Zelda, I don't know. Regardless of that though, my guess is that the malice tried to take over Link's arm, and then the green energy stopped it from completely taking him over or something, and possibly also rescued him from being in that dungeon area with Ganon. When Hyrule Castle rose up and all that malice happened, Zelda fell, Link got pulled up to safety, and now they're apart. So I'm guessing Link is sort of stuck in the overworld, unable to save Zelda. And I think Link will have to do things above ground that will affect an underground world that Zelda is trapped in. And what Link does will further open up where Zelda can go underground. So I do think you probably will switch between these two characters. I think that's still pretty likely. Playing mostly as Link, but then when more of these underground areas are opened through Link's actions above ground, you can then switch to Zelda and continue further exploring the dungeon system below. Maybe Link will be raising up more and more of these floating islands over time, and doing so will open up new paths underground for Zelda to explore some giant dungeon system. So potentially Zelda is the one doing all the dungeon exploration and puzzle solving, while Link's job will be to unlock more parts of this dungeon by doing things in the above ground world, and then Zelda will be able to explore below ground. So instead of having the Divine Beasts as all the dungeons in this game, I think what we're going to have is an underground labyrinth system that Zelda must actually defeat, and that's going to be all the dungeon parts of the game. The overworld exploration section of the game are all for Link, and the dungeon parts are going to be all for Zelda. That's my guess. And thus I think something close to as above, so below would make a good subtitle for the game. Potentially the title could even refer to two characters working together or something, and that would also give it away. But I think referring to the sky and the underworld is probably what they're hiding. They don't want to reveal that both of those things are going to affect each other. That's just my guess, of course, but that's what I'm thinking. I'll also say floating islands are very reminiscent of Skyward Sword, which takes place at the beginning of the Zelda timeline. So I'm not totally counting out the idea of some time travel shenanigans happening in this game. I think we have already seen time reversal in this game through use of the arm runes or whatever we saw with the spike ball and stuff. And Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity did have some time travel stuff in it, so having time travel in the Breath of the Wild universe is already set. There's a precedence for that. I personally think we're seeing the same Link. I don't think we're seeing two different Links in two different timelines. I think most people are just basing that based on the different outfit that he's wearing, but I don't think that's the case. You change outfits in Breath of the Wild, I think that's all that we're seeing here. But if there is two different Links or two different characters, I do think that would be pretty cool. Somehow doing something with the hero from 10,000 years ago would be pretty sweet. I just don't think these two different Link outfits we're seeing are two different Links in two different timelines or something. One cool idea could be to incorporate the memories like we had in the first Breath of the Wild. Only this time the memories aren't of Link, but of the original owner of the arm that he now has or something. Maybe we'll slowly see what happened 10,000 years ago, and this arm was somehow involved with the legendary hero from back then. Searching around the map for memories that slowly revealed the backstory was a really interesting way to tell a story in Breath of the Wild, and I do think they might try to keep that storytelling aspect this time around. One way to do it would be to have memories from the 10,000 years ago first time Calamity Ganon attacked, and that could be memories from the arm itself. Makes me think of that one Rick and Morty episode, which is kinda odd. The floating islands connecting to Skyward Sword is pretty interesting, and I do think that speculation about the Loftwing amiibo possibly tying into this game somehow makes a lot of sense after seeing these floating islands. Much like using the Wolf Link amiibo to get a wolf companion in Breath of the Wild, I think using the Loftwing amiibo to get a Loftwing companion to explore might actually be what we get. It doesn't seem flying around is off the table this game, or that it would be a game-breaking mechanic to have a Loftwing to fly around with. It seems Link can easily traverse around the sky. It's possible all the floating islands get raised up at the same time, but it would be really cool if they slowly get raised up over time. I just think it would be really neat if we slowly raised up individual islands doing certain events on the ground. Possibly that would affect the Hyrule Overworld map, and obviously the floating islands themselves would be something new to explore. And like I suggested, possibly an underground area where Zelda is could be affected by this as well. Given that many people were a little worried about using the same map this time, and that it might be a little bland to re-explore the same area, if we're constantly reshaping the map of Hyrule, then that would add a lot of constantly exciting exploration. Even if we're able to fly around the entire overworld map from above, if it's constantly being reshaped by raising up new islands, that adds a ton of exploration. I will say the ruins that we see on these floating islands seem to be totally new structures. So even if we are somehow capable of causing parts of the map to rise up, I imagine they would not simply be the same part of the map, but now in the sky. Rather, they'd be something from like underground that has crumbled free and risen up. The ruins that are on top of the islands are only recently uncovered when that part of the map is lifted up into the sky or something. Speaking of all the cool stuff we could see in exploring the sky, I hope maybe we'll get some sky whales. Flying whales have been a part of Zelda games in the past, and Breath of the Wild sort of teased us with these giant whale bones they scattered throughout the map. Would make for a very cool sky boss to have some giant whales floating around like the dragons were in the first Breath of the Wild game. And we did see this thing in the Hatano lab, so maybe that's the new Master Cycle for the endgame. You get that and you get to fly around on it or something. That'd be cool. Alright, I'm getting a little wildly speculative here, and I could make this video go on forever if I just start guessing at weird enemies and stuff I'd like to see. We did, of course, see two new enemies here, the cool stone mech thing, which, because it seems to be powered by that same green energy, I'm guessing that maybe some race of people that created the arm, either the Sheikah or possibly the Zonai, have also made this mech. So I'm guessing it's more of a guardian for something in the sky, rather than something that works for like Ganon or the Malice or whatever. And then we also saw this worm thing that reminds me of like a Lamola or a Lever that Link fights with the Flame Dragon Head shield weapon. This dragon head weapon could be some ancient Zonai weapon, as they seem to worship the dragons. I assume there's other elements for this weapon as well, like ice and electricity. And this scene does look like Link is underground, which could go against my theory that Zelda will be the one exploring the underground sections. Though this might just be inside a cave, or even inside one of the floating islands, and Zelda being trapped in some sprawling labyrinth dungeon below all of Hyrule that's inaccessible to Link could still be a thing. Link going inside caves and stuff could still happen, but the main underground world, again, might just be for Zelda. Just my guess, though. Alright, well that's a lot of Breath of the Wild 2 speculation. I feel like I went off on a bunch of tangents here, but there you go, there's a bunch of theories and just thoughts that were in my head watching this trailer. With a release window of only 2022, I imagine we still have a while to go. I'm guessing it's not even going to be spring 2022, or they would have just said that. So the wait for this game might still be pretty excruciatingly long here. I might start doing more Breath of the Wild 2 speculation videos. While I covered most of what I think I can pull out of this trailer, there's still lots of stuff I'd like to simply see happen in this game that isn't really based on anything, but just my own thoughts on what I'd like to see. Like adding more variety to the enemies, and what old enemies I'd like to see return, or how I'd like them to improve the weapon durability system, stuff like that. So maybe I'll do a video talking about all that stuff eventually. I will do the After Kazuya speculation video soon here for those waiting for that one. But in the meantime, what did you guys think of the Breath of the Wild 2 trailer, and what we got at E3 this year? And what do you think about any of the theories I proposed and talked about in this video? Anything stand out to you as particularly cool, or do you have any theories of your own that I didn't touch upon here? What do you think of my as above, so below title and the concept to go with it? Zelda playable, but in underground dungeon sections, while Link explores Hyrule and the sky and the overworld, and it affecting what happens in those dungeon sections with Zelda. If you guys have any thoughts or comments about anything I talked about in this video, leave them below. Or above.
Remember to like the video, leave a comment in the section below, and subscribe to PapaGenos.
Twitter, Patreon, Discord.